Hello, and welcome to Track Talk Live.
I'm Doug, Mr. Clickety, and this is Lilia.
Hi.
Our new moderator. Steve is out and about doing other things and busy, but he will come back periodically for guest visits. And as you can see, Lilia doesn't have a nickname on her mug yet, so we're working on a nickname for...
I just have a logo, so you should comment below a train-related nickname that you think is appropriate for me.
We're working on a nickname for Lilia, but I think this is going to be great. So send us your comments for sure.
Yeah, all right, and I just want to remind you guys to follow us on all of your relevant social media channels so that you can know when we're doing another Track Talk Live and be notified of when we're going live. On Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, you can ask us your questions there, and also be asking your questions below in the chat so we can answer them live. And also right below us, you'll see a little banner to sign up for our newsletter, which will also notify you when we're going live again. So without further ado, let's just kind of talk about what you've been doing, Doug, and where you've been since the last Track Talk Live.
Well, Steve and I still work together, so we inspire each other, and you never know what's going to happen from month to month. But this particular month, I've been working on car loads.
Oh.
And as part of we do a waybill system and move cars around in a realistic way. And then, of course, if you have open cars, you have to have a correct load. And so I've been working on some rolled wire, I guess they'd simulate mesh loads using fiberglass screening rolled up.
Yeah.
And then tied with a thread and banded into the car. So that's what I've been doing.
Yeah. Been on any interesting train trips or have any train trips coming up?
Well, I actually do have a trip coming up, actually first of next week. I'll be out. I'm a big Southern Pacific fan, as you know if you've been watching these Track Talk Lives. And I'll be heading out to Santa Rosa, California, north of San Francisco, for the annual Southern Pacific Historical Society Convention.
Cool. Sounds really awesome. Well, like I said, leave your comments below live and we'll answer them live, but we'll go ahead with some pre-submitted questions and get going with what people have been asking.
Let's do it.
So our first question is from Danny from the US, who is doing an N-scale model. And Danny asks, my question is about wiring. I'm using a 14 gauge wire for my bus line, and I have 2 open line ends, which is 23 feet. Or should I have only 1 open line, which is 30 feet for DC or DCC?
We've had similar questions like that before, and if your layout is such a configuration where you can make an entire loop around, that would equalize the voltage all the way around, but it's not really that important. He's using a heavy enough wire. And generally, if you have stub ends at each end, so basically your feed would come in the center, so it sort of looks like a T shape, the wiring. I mean, that's fine. If your power feed is in the center, then your voltage drop would be lessened as you get out toward the 2 ends. And generally, with that heavy a wire, the voltage drop is pretty much negligible anyway.
All right, good answer. Our next question is from Jay from Columbus, Ohio. I'm just starting my model railroad. I live in an apartment, so I don't have a lot of room. I figured by modeling an N scale, I can do more with less. So my question is, for the framing, can I use 1x2s and 1/4 inch plywood, or do I have to use something stronger? Say 2x4s and 1/2 inch plywood. Also, how long should the legs be? Thank you for your help.
Well, now, did he say he wanted it to be portable?
He did not mention.
Okay. In N scale, you're not talking hardly any weight. I mean, the only the critical structure would be to keep your layout level and true. You don't want it to be warping. And actually, people nowadays are using say aluminum structural components because they're easy to saw. You can saw them with a hacksaw, and you get a lot of strength with very little weight. So he's saying you wanted to use 1/4 inch plywood, probably?
Yeah, or 1/2 inch.
I mean, 1/4 inch would probably be fine, depending on the size of the layout. I mean, generally speaking, the thinner your substructure is, then the more framing you need underneath to keep it from sagging or warping. So if I was him in his situation, I would really consider using these structural parts. And you can buy those parts over at the home improvement stores. If you have, like, say, a Home Depot in your area, that type of thing, they come in various lengths up to 8 feet long. And you can bolt them together. It really is pretty neat. So you might consider that. And then as far as height goes, it really depends on your room. I mean, from a scenic standpoint, the optimum height is eye level because that's how you see real trains. But sometimes in a room that's just too high. It looks too.
Yeah.
So what I would say is just experiment. Maybe start a little higher than you think, and you can always cut the legs off. And so people, 48 is kind of a general baseline rule. So I would say somewhere between 48 and 50, 52, somewhere in there is a good place to start. And it's your layout, so just make it whatever is comfortable.
It's your layout. Try out what works for
That's
you,
right?
Yeah.
Log on right at your layout. You can do anything you want.
All right. We have a live question from Eric in Montreal, Canada. Eric says, I'm looking for an electric system because I want to install some lights in homes, in the streets, etc., etc. I've looked around and there's a lot of different systems. Is there one better than any others, and what would you suggest?
Well, there are systems that are made to be kind of fancy systems that are made to be compatible and plug in and all this and that. And I'm kind of old school. I mean, I don't mind doing it the old-fashioned way, where you actually use a miniature terminal strips underneath, and then you would have a bus wire for your lighting, just as you would have a bus wire for your train control. So you'd have a separate bus wire and a separate power supply that would run your lighting. And depending on whether you're using say miniature bulbs or LEDs, sometimes people actually use two separate power supplies. One if you have a little miniature incandescents, and then a separate power supply if you're using LEDs. And that would mean then you'd have two separate bus wires. And then you always do your bus wires in a different color wire so that you don't get mixed up later on. So each bus wire would be color coded, or you can label them underneath your layout too. But so I don't mind doing it the old-fashioned way. I mean, Woodland Scenics makes a real neat kind of a plug-in thing that is fine. I mean, I'm not putting it down, but I'm old-fashioned. I like doing it the old-fashioned way.
Sometimes if it's broken, you don't need. If it's not broken, you don't need to change it. Yeah. So be sure to keep asking your questions live, and we'll answer them live. So we'll go back to some of the other ones. This one is from Wally from South America, but who is modeling Southern Alberta in HO scale. Is there a rule of thumb for how high the backdrop should be so it looks just right? Higher than the tallest building, or some fixed proportion of the depth of the layout? I have a 4x8 table layout against a wall. Floor to ceiling is not feasible, and I believe it would look somewhat too much because there would be more backdrop than layout.
Well, there again, there's a lot of variables. I mean, it depends on your room and all that. But the rule of thumb is that for the most realism, your horizon line should be at eye level. To make it the most realistic. And so if you're depending on your scenery, I mean, we don't know if he's making mountain scenery or what kind of scenery, but suppose that your horizon line is at eye level, and then you want your backdrop to come above that. And it really, it's a personal thing. It depends on your room. So I would say experimentation is the best. I would just, people you can do a temporary backdrop using, say, foam core. Do something sky blue, a pale blue, and set it up there and see how it looks. And then if you like the way it looks, then you can do a more permanent backdrop. But if you have any more particular questions on that, be sure and send another email.
Send them on in. All right. Our next question is from Tom, who is from Richland, Washington, working in HO scale. And Tom asks, how should a beginner approach a first layout design in order to ensure smooth, reliable operation specifically? And do you recommend DC or DCC?
Well, generally, your first layout, you kind of consider that a practice layout.
Yeah.
I mean, very seldom do guys just dive into a big complicated project without a little practice, unless you have a lot of help in your area that people have done it before and kind of guide you the right way. So I would say if you're going to start on a 4x8 layout, just, consider it practice. Do everything carefully. Make sure that whatever you're using for track and roadbed is done true. If you're laying out your curves, for example, and you have a particular fixed radius you want to use, then I always draw an arc on the tabletop before I put the track down, so I know that I'm following that particular arc. And you can make a trammel out of a yardstick and having a nail and a pencil clamped at either end, and just draw that arc. And that way you know it's true. I mean, I think a big problem with people starting out is they, if you use fixed radius curves, they don't follow the prescribed radius, and they end up with a kink at the rail joint. So you have a kink, and of course your trains aren't going to like that. So, sight down, like a gun sight, you're going to get your eyeball right down on the rail and sight down there and make sure it's true. And as far as electronics goes, DC is becoming almost kind of archaic. I mean, that was all we had in the old days, but there's so much advantage to DCC. And if you're buying locomotives, of course, you can buy locomotives that are DC and DCC compatible or DCC ready. But they're again, if you want to start with DC, that's fine, with the idea that you'd ultimately move up to DCC, because DCC really is the way to go. Everything is geared for DCC now.
It's much easier to learn.
Yeah.
All right, good answer. Our next question is from Ian in the United Kingdom.
All right.
So we got another one out of the country who is working in OO.
Mm-hmm.
Ian says, I want to build a collapsible 8x4 layout as I have limited space available. Again, another limited space person.
Yep.
Has anyone in your club got a basic layout/construction plan? When folded down, I would like the layout to protrude no more than 12 inches or less. Any help on this would be much appreciated.
So he's talking about maybe a fold down, like a drop leaf kind of an idea maybe, but he wants to fold it up before he drops it down so that it's only 1 foot, but he's talking about starting out with about a 4 foot, so he'd want it to fold into 4 sections and drop down. Well, that's a lot of folding.
That is a lot of folding.
People use piano hinges for stuff like that. That'll keep everything true. I mean, that's probably the best thing to do. But the problem is that if you have any kind of any kind of verticality on your layout, what are you going to do with that? Like, say you have a building. Well, you can't fold the layout up with a building in place, so you'd have to take everything off. And then even if your track is on a roadbed, that could raise the layout up a couple inches. And then, so when you fold it up, you have to compensate for that. So that's all considerations. But there, like we talked about with the earlier question, you can certainly use these aluminum structural elements and put them together like Tinker Toys. If anybody remembers Tinker Toys.
I do remember Tinker Toys.
And it's lightweight and very true, and makes it easy to fold up. So that's what I'd recommend. But if you have any other questions again, or more specific questions, be sure and let us know.
All right, we got another live question from David in San Diego.
Aha!
Working in HO scale.
Warm country.
And he says, hi, Doug. Can you offer any ideas for reliable cleaning methods or products that can be used for cleaning your track? Any tips would be great.
Well, there's a lot of controversy about that too. Some people like the liquid track cleaners, or oil-based cleaners, like Goo Gone is an example.
Yeah.
Or Clipper oil. Some people use Clipper oil, and then other people just think that's horrible. So I found, personally, these oil-based cleaners tend to leave a little oil residue on the track, which to me attracts more dirt down the road. I mean, if any dust is in the air, it's going to stick. So I like to keep it dry and clean. I actually use one of these foam sanding blocks, if you're familiar with those.
I don't. What is a foam?
Well, you can buy them in a home improvement store. It's basically, it looks so big, size of, like, say, a kitchen sponge or something, and it has a foam inside. Then it's basically like a sanding surface on the top. And I use that. And the neat thing about these foam blocks, you can cut them down. I use a serrated bread knife.
Oh.
So you can actually take these foam blocks and cut them to whatever you want. And as you viewers know, your regular viewers know, I'm an S scale. And I made my own track cleaning car.
Oh.
So it doesn't have to look pretty. You can saw this block down to the right size, a block of wood, and then put some trucks and couplers on the end of it, and pull it around. And that way, another thing is, as you detail your layout, it's hard to get in and clean your track without wrecking something.
Yeah.
So the best thing is to run trains. That keeps the track clean.
Always run your trains.
And keep the track polished, and use a track cleaning car. And like I say, I like the dry method. There's a Bright Boy was a kind of a well-known abrasive block in the old days that you could buy. But now these foam sanding blocks, I just recommend a foam sanding block.
They're good to go, huh?
and cut it to whatever size you need.
They're customizable. That's always a good thing, you know?
Saw it right up with a serrated bread knife.
Whatever works. Get creative.
Yep.
All right. Our next question is from Charles, who is currently in Berwick, Pennsylvania, but originally from Charleston, South Carolina, working in HO and N scale, asking, do you have any information on kits or models available of the Best Friend, which ran from Charleston to Hamburg, SC, during the 1830s? Very specific.
I am familiar with the Best Friend of Charleston. There used to be one. Oh, gads, who made that? Probably 50 years ago, I saw one out on the market. It was a plastic. Maybe Bachmann. I don't even remember anymore. But you know, it didn't run very well because in those days the motors weren't very good. I haven't seen anything recently, but I would recommend maybe just googling the Best Friend of Charleston and see what pops up. I'd be curious, and so if you find something, let me know.
Us know.
Let us know. Yeah. So.
All right. Yeah, you can find anything on Google most times.
Yeah, just Best Friend of Charleston.
All right. Thanks for your answer. Our next question is from Dave, who is from Bradford, Ontario, Canada. HO and N scale. What's the best technique for building a lift out section? Or is it better to go with a flip up, flip down, or swing out section? Lots of questions about flipping and
well, now there again, it depends on your situation. I mean, if you're coming through a door, you know, and do you have scenery on this lift out? You want it to drop down, and then every time you walk through there, you hit this thing accidentally, and it breaks something off, and you know, so there's all different kinds of ideas. I know of a guy who actually built a bridge as a lift out, and he had it on kind of a track, and it would go way the heck up. The whole bridge would go way the heck up to the ceiling.
Wow.
I mean, generally speaking, you want to do a lift out on straight track, because if you try to do it on a curve, it's real hard to keep the curve rail aligned and everything. So I'd recommend straight track. And then there are also kind of fail-safe things you can do, contacts you can put in that will kill the track as you get close to the lift out, so somebody doesn't accidentally run a train off with the lift out. So there again, if you want to send more specifics, we can certainly talk about it. It really depends on your room and the space available, and if you have scenery on it or not, all that kind of thing. So
lots of people looking to move and lift and flip and fold.
And again, aluminum. If you do things out of aluminum, I mean, it's so much more true than wood. I mean, wood can warp and all that. If you use these aluminum angles, they're structurally true. And you can make a lift out of an aluminum angle, and it's lightweight, and yet it's sturdy, and it's not going to warp on you.
It's a good option. All right, we got another question live from John in Maine. He's working in HO and O scale. When creating a block building, do you have tips for painting the blocks to appear that there's concrete between them, so in between each one of the bricks?
Well, there's various methods for doing that, depending on really on the material you use. If you have a material that has decent relief in the blocks, you can actually paint the concrete blocks to start with, the concrete block color or whatever you want them to look at. And then as far as the mortar goes, you can actually rub that in later, and then take it can be, you don't want anything too soft. You want it, anyway, like a rag, very smooth, maybe a cloth rag or heavy paper towel, and wipe off the concrete block surface, and that will leave the paint in the recessed mortar lines.
Leaving it there and then off of the outside.
So that's one way of doing it. I mean, guys have different methods. There's guys who use, like, say, marking pencils.
Yeah.
You can buy magic markers in, any color you want nowadays, and so you can actually get a gray marker, and you can actually fine point marker. You can actually take a gray fine point marker and draw it in. So it kind of depends on the relief of the material, I think, but there's some really nice stuff that's been done.
Got a few different options methods there. Yeah. Got another live question from Frank. Frank says, I have a Weaver car in O scale, and the trucks are broken. Where can I get new trucks that will work with this car?
Well, now you don't have to stay with Weaver necessarily. Now you're talking, you didn't mention whether it was 3-rail or 2-rail. But I mean, there's a lot of parts available, and it doesn't have to be Weaver. So I would probably, you could check with your local hobby store and see if they recommend something, or there again, you could Google Weaver trucks freight cars and freight car trucks, and see what comes up and see if there's, I mean, there's probably any number of brands. You might have to do a little modification as far as mounting the truck, because they mount differently with different size screws and so on. With a little bit of work, you can make just about anything work.
All right. We have a question from another Doug.
Ah, good name.
Doug is from Verndale, Washington, working in, actually it says 3/16 S scale. And
my buddy.
So Doug and Doug working on
Yeah, I like that. Good work.
And he asks, when you're hand laying a cold 125 rail or 125 rail, should a person make their joints even or uneven by a couple of inches?
Well, you know, actually we've talked about this before on Track Talk Live. I'm doing industrial track work in S scale, and I'm using code 70 because I wanted real delicate rail. But actually, you know, the thing is, if you lay your track true to begin with, it doesn't really even matter. Oh. I mean, the train shouldn't even know the joint is there. Oh. You know, you want to be sure and support your joint. Sometimes guys, when they put in, say your rail connector, your rail joiner, they don't support that rail joiner underneath in that gap, and then you can actually get a little bit of a sag right there at the joint. Oh. So no matter what you do, you want to make sure that well, we mentioned that earlier in another question, make sure your track is true no matter what you do. And then, you know, the joints should basically be invisible. The train should have no clue where the joints are. There should be no bump, no anything at the joint. So in that case, it wouldn't matter.
All right. Thanks, Doug and Doug, for the question there.
That scale. Stay in touch.
All right. Our next question is from Japan, from Toshia, who's working in N scale. And Toshia asks, how do you make people by an N gauge scale or N gauge size? It's very small to make by hand. And do you have any tips or tricks for making structures and people in N gauge size?
Well, you know, first of all, there's a lot of product available in N scale. He should be able to find N scale people fairly easily. I mean, you can go online and I know you can buy bulk unpainted people. You can buy, say, 100 people. Yeah, in a bag of unpainted people, you know, and paint them. The painted people obviously are more expensive, but yeah, I mean, you're right. The N scale is pretty small. I mean, I'm sure there are guys out there who could carve people. In the old days, used to actually carve people out of wax. You know, they make like a little stick figure out of wire and then carve it out of wax. But you know, you have to be like a jeweler to do that. In
have one of those
scale.
like eyeglasses.
And same with their buildings. I mean, there's so much. There's just unbelievable amount of building material out now. The wall surfaces. I mean, anything. You know, wood, stone, concrete, tin. You know, corrugated metal buildings. I mean, there's so much available. I don't think you'd have any problem. And also, we've talked on earlier shows about the fact that I like to mock up a building. I use thin, rigid cardboard and actually build a building shape and put that on my layout and see if I like the shape. If I don't like the shape, then I'll modify it. And then if you like the shape, then you can actually put your final wall surface right on top of that mock-up. Yeah. Yeah. Same with windows. You can adjust the windows and, you know, do all that in the mock-up, and that's how I'd recommend doing it.
A lot of adjusting and readjusting.
Yeah, just, you know, you don't have to do the final thing right away. You can set it on your layout for a while and look at it and see what you think. And I mean, this is a creative endeavor, so you want to just think about it for a while. Be
creative. We have another live question from Michael in Iowa, working in HO scale, like many others have been. Do you have any ideas for creating large mountains? What materials should I use?
Well, you know, there is a new material out by Woodland Scenics, GADS, what do they call it? It's kind of a heavy material, I can't think of the name right now, heavy material that you can form to shape. I think it's probably related to some kind of like industrial insulation material or something. And anyway, that's one way of doing it. I mean, in the old days, we would take basically what would be chicken wire or stucco mesh and shape it up that way, because when you're building a big mountain, there's no sense making it solid inside. It's going to be a hollow shell, especially if you have tunnels and things. You want to have access in your tunnel, because you know one thing, Lilia.
I know one thing.
In model railroading, it never goes bad in the front.
Oh, it's always in the back.
It always goes bad. It goes bad where you can't get at it. So as soon as you put your track in a tunnel, it's going to go bad. So you want to have access. So if you build a big hollow mountain, of course you can get in there and have access. So we use hydrocal in the old days with paper towels. Now they have the gauze material, like the stuff you use like a plaster cast.
Oh, yeah.
For a plaster cast, it already has the material, the plaster right on it. So all you do is soak it in water, and you can lay it out and build it up. And it's very thin but very strong.
Yeah.
Actually,
so it's probably light, easy to move.
And it's light. Yeah. And the thing is, if you do a few layers on it, it's so doggone strong. People have actually done it where you can walk on it. I mean, it's that strong.
Wow.
Or lean on it if you have to get at something. So that's what I'd recommend. It's something, a hollow shell with a support, and then you can scenic over the top of it. We use, once you get the shell done, you could use any type of scenic materials over the top, depending on what you're trying to create. Rock molds or, real earth or, whatever.
I can testify to the chicken wire. Actually, I made a volcano in the 8th grade out of chicken wire, and it was like a stone like that. Yeah. So it has been used.
Now, if you want a volcano on your layout, contact Lilia.
Can help you make fake lava and everything. I don't know. I just want to take a little time here too to remind everybody to follow us on all our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, so you can be notified about our next Track Talk Live, and also sign up for our newsletter in the little banner below this video, and keep asking your questions live so that we may answer them. And if we don't get to your question, send us an email and we'll try and get back to you as soon as we can. So without further ado, we'll go on to our next question. Another live one submitted by John. John says, I model an HO scale and have a bunch of Tyco cars and was wondering what type of couplers were used on them and how do I replace them if need be.
Well, if these are old Tyco cars, I wouldn't even try to replace those couplers.
Oh. Sorry, John.
The by far and away the number one HO coupler is the KD. And a lot of these early Tyco cars had what was called a Talgo coupler, where the coupler was on a shank attached to the truck, so the coupler would swivel with the truck as it went around a curve. And they were designed for very sharp curves on beginner layouts. Well, the problem was those things it's really not the best setup because they tend to want to pull the wheels off the rail and everything. And so basically what I would do is use KD couplers, and there's there's I don't know, dozens and dozens of different styles of KD couplers that you can use for any kind of situation. But you can actually get a KD coupler that comes with a draft gearbox that you can mount rigidly on the frame of the car, like a real railroad car would have. Yeah. And just don't make your curves too sharp. I mean, you don't want curves that sharp anyway. So I mean, 18-inch radius is really about the minimum you want to go for HO. So you have no problem with 18-inch radius mounting your coupler right onto the frame of the car rather than on the truck. And even the Tyco trucks can be replaced. KD makes a great line of freight trucks, and other brands do too. So you can actually replace all of the running gear and then keep your Tyco car, and it'll be a much better operating car. And then also weight. We've talked about this in other shows. Adding weight to your cars. So generally the cars that are under-weighted when you buy them.
You have to weight them down.
Weight them down a little bit, and they'll track a lot better.
I'm learning a lot. I actually don't know. So, we have another live question from Wayne. When joining track in any gauge, should you leave a gap due to weather changes causing expansion and contraction? Due to
it depends on your room. See, all of this depends on your room. What do if you're building in an unheated, climate-controlled room, then you might have some of that movement. But generally speaking, that's not that big of an issue. When you build a layout, you want to build it structurally correct, as we mentioned earlier. Yep. Make sure you build it structurally correct so there's no sags, and sure, you can get a little bit of expansion and contraction in the like say in the plywood. But if you're in a climate-controlled room, the temperature is controlled and the humidity is controlled. So if it moves, it's not going to move very darn much.
Yeah.
So if you're not in a climate-controlled room, you probably have to leave some room for expansion and contraction.
Have you ever seen any really tragic examples of something expanding too much, or like
like that? If the layout shrinks, and then the track is going to go to the rail joint, and that can happen, or it can pull apart. And the other, if you get humidity in the room and it expands, it can pull the track apart. It can certainly happen.
Yeah.
But you don't hear about that so much anymore because people are I think in the old days people were building layouts in basements, and with the spiders and the bugs and everything, and it was a whole different situation. But now people are building layouts in a more controlled environment.
There's a lot more climate control going around.
Keep the bugs away.
Yeah, there you go. Our next question is from Carl in Arkansas, working in HO. What's the best way to do inclines, and how do you best handle the height transitions?
Well, in the old days you had to be pretty good at math to figure out the percent of grade, but nowadays you can buy digital levels. In fact, I don't have my phone here, but you can actually get an app for your iPhone that will show you the gradient in percent, so you can actually
model railroading.
You don't have to know anything about math. I mean, basically the percent grade, like model railroads and real railroads, are kind of similar in the fact that on a mainline railroad, say 2.5% grade is really is about as steep as you want to go. Well, that would be 2.5 inches in 100 inches is a 2%, or in a real railroad it might be 2.5 feet in 100 feet, but anyway, that's the ratio. So 100% grade would be a 45% incline. And so if you can buy a digital level at your home improvement store, a little digital level, and read it right out. So if you stay 2.5% for a mainline railroad, for a logging railroad or a mining railroad or branch line, you can go 3, maybe even 4%, because the real railroads had to do that to get to these remote locations. And then you want to make sure that if you're going over another track, you have the right amount of clearance. Now, like in HO, you need 3 inches of clearance.
3 inches.
But that's for the most extreme modern equipment. So if you're doing something old-time, smaller equipment, you could clear 2.5, 2 3/4 inches.
Good answer. We got another live question from Thomas, who says, "Hi, Doug. Any tips for creating ripples in their water on his layout?" Ripples.
Well, to start with, you need the base surface, and you can use. People use there's magic water from Woodland Scenics. People use epoxy varnish. You can use gloss medium, depending, just to get the lake surface in, and then the color in. If you use something like gloss medium, you actually do that in multiple coats. You don't try to do it all in once. And then if you do multiple coats, it's kind of neat because you can take, like, say, an old tire and throw it in the water and then kind of bury it in the water. Or if you have a dock, or I don't know, something like that, a bridge in the water, then you can actually, it'll actually be submerged in the water. So once you get the actual surface in there, then you can whip up waves or currents, and I think the easy way to do that is to use what's called a gloss gel, which is available in art stores like Michael's. They're around the country. Michael's are all over the country. So a place like Michael's, you buy what's called a gloss gel, and it's white. It kind of looks like, I don't know, like white glue, kind of, but then it dries clear.
Oh.
So you can, like, say you wanted to do like foam or something at the bottom of a waterfall, maybe something like that. You can actually add color to it. If you don't want it to be crystal clear, you can actually put color in there. I like to use a color. I used to call it iridescent white. It's a different name now, but it's actually kind of a fluorescent white kind of a color that just really looks like foamy water. And so you can mix that in with this gel. And the neat thing about this, I mean, it's kind of a slow process, but maybe in a way that's good, because you can just keep playing with it until you get it the way you want it.
Mess around with it. So then when you add the color to the gel, does it dry like transparent with the color, or does it become more opaque with the color?
Well, it depends how much color you put in there. I mean, because it's a clear base, and so you can play with it. I mean, I've seen people actually put fish. Bigger scale, you actually put fish in the water. You put the fish in, like a little wire sticking up from the bottom. You put a fish in there, then you bury the fish in the water.
Yeah.
So, there's, you can do lily pads and that kind of thing the same way. So, and as with a lot of things in model railroading, there's more than one way to do everything. So that's how I do it, and that's kind of that's my technique. And I like it. It works out well. And then actually too, if after a while, like say maybe a year later, if the layout's looking kind of dusty and funky, well, put another coat of gloss on it.
There you go. It just becomes brand new again.
Another new coat of gloss. Yeah.
All right. Our next question is from Mike from Conroe, Texas, working in HO only, he specifies. I have a 16 by 6 work table that I'm trying to create a layout in my garage, but every layout I set it up on doesn't seem to satisfy what I'm trying to create. I would like to set up a prototype of the Chicago and Northwestern, but I can't get the distances from Chicago to Wisconsin without running out of room. Do you have any suggestions? Also, I have quite a few old locos that I have not run since the 1970s. Most no longer run. Who can I call to have them serviced in the area? Specific.
Well, let's start out with the first one. Okay, so now in HO scale, 60 feet is a scale mile.
Okay.
So, like I say, you want to go from Chicago to Wisconsin. That's what, how far is it? 100 miles to the state line? I don't know. Say it's 100 miles. Okay. So 100 miles from Chicago to Wisconsin, that would be times 60. That would be about 6,000 feet, right?
Yep.
So that would be a pretty big layout.
That's a big layout.
So anyway, yeah, you have to use a little creativity, a little theatrics, and try to, maybe, a lot of people only have, say you have 60 feet, that's only 1 mile, and your whole layout is only 1 mile long. So you have to use the creativity and theatrics and try to make it look like a much longer distance than it really is. And there are scenic tricks, view blocks and little peekaboos and scene breaks and all this kind of thing that you can use to, you're in Chicago and then boom, all of a sudden, 10 feet later you're in Wisconsin, so yeah, I mean, you have to use, this is, it's a creative, three-dimensional art is really what this is, and then you have to use your own imagination and creativity to make it look like you're going from Chicago to Wisconsin. And then what was the second part of the question?
Asking about, well, let me find it back on here again. He has some old locomotives that haven't been running since the 70s, and he was wondering who he could get them serviced by, or if you have cars that are no longer running, how do you get them running up?
Well, there again, I mean, the technology has changed so much, and even the manufacturing process, all this computer design and all this stuff, I mean, everything is made now is so much better than what you would have bought in the 70s.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hardly worth even fixing up this old stuff. I'm sorry, but I mean, the motors are so much better, the detail is better, everything is better, and so I'm sure there are people around that that can maybe fix that stuff. But unless there's something you really, really, love and want to preserve, I mean, I would just suggest starting over, especially there again with the DCC. Now you can buy locomotives that are either already have DCC in them or DCC ready, where you can just plug in a decoder. I mean, why in the heck would you try to, it's a lot of work to fix up this old stuff when it's just not going to be anywhere near as good as the new stuff.
You can upgrade it.
Yeah. Sorry.
All right, our next question is from Bill, another live question. Is there a recommended distance between layers on a multi-layer layout?
Well, boy, see, there's so many of these answers are
subjective.
Yeah, subjective. Depends on your room, and there's also how far over, like say on your upper level, how far over the lower level is the upper level going to hang. So typically your upper level wouldn't protrude as far out as your lower level, because otherwise it's going to block the view of the lower level. And so there's also lighting considerations. I mean, usually like you're lighting your lower level with light from the underside of the upper level, so there's lighting considerations and all that. So there's so many variables. And then your layout height again, as we talked about earlier. I mean, how far off the floor are you doing this whole thing, and then how far are these levels separated? Sometimes people incorporate the two different level into one scene, maybe like with a big tall mountain or something. But then other times you want them scenically distinctly different, and so there's so many variables. If you want to send me more specifics on what you're doing, or even send photographs. You can email photographs in. I'd be happy to help you out in more detail.
Send in your photos. We'd love to see them. Yeah. All right. Our next question is from Clay in Hampstead, Maryland, working in O scale. What is the best method for stripping paint from a post-war Lionel F3 engine? That's a specific question.
Yeah. Well,
or stripping paint in
post-war is probably plastic.
Yeah.
I would guess. I mean, we don't know how far post-war we're talking here, but anyway, the plastic they used in those days was, well, I don't know what it was. Pretty tough stuff.
Yeah. Sturdy.
They made those locomotives so a kid could throw it across the room and it wouldn't break. I mean, it was really tough, and so that shell will probably take just about any kind of stripper. We mentioned earlier, maybe a show or two back, about this Scale Coat 2 stripper, which is supposed to be a non-toxic stripper that will work on even more modern plastics. You have to be careful not to use too toxic a stripper, because you could actually melt your plastic if it's too toxic, aside from breathing the stuff.
Yeah.
So I would say maybe try some of that Scale Coat 2 stripper. And see, the other thing is the paints. It could be like an old lead-based paint on this locomotive.
Yeah.
So you don't know. You don't know about the composition of the plastic. You don't know about the composition of the paint. And so you're going to have to experiment. And I would start out with that Scale Coat 2 stripper. They say it'll strip just anything. So I would start out with that and see what happens and go from there.
Work up from there. All right, our next question is from Andy in Southampton, working in OO gauge. What is the best magazine to buy to look at train layouts on a 6x4 baseboard, please, as I have just started in model train world?
Well, it's hard to say like one particular publication is better than another, because they try to do a lot of different types of layouts, big layouts, small layouts, shelf layouts, switching layouts, and all that. And so, and you didn't say exactly what you want to model. I would say the first thing is to have kind of a little backstory for your railroad, and say, okay, I want to model whatever it is, a mining railroad or a logging railroad or a mainline railroad, and then kind of work backwards into actually what you want to build. And then no matter where you are, there's going to be some other model railroaders around, groups, clubs, groups. Yeah, and I would talk to other people who are in your area and see what they're doing, and ask them questions, some experienced modelers, and get some background information. And you can always get a hold of us.
Yep, we're
and
here.
We'll try to help you in more detail once we have any of these questions. We send as much background detail in as you can, so that it helps us to answer the question.
The more information, the better.
Yeah.
We have a live question from David, who's working at S-Scale. Recommendations for creating a split rail fence.
Ooh, well, that's a pretty interesting question. Well, especially in S-Scale, because you're getting to be a bigger scale. I mean, you almost have to do a real wood fence. I mean, I don't know of anything that's going to look as good as real wood. I mean, it's going to be a lot of work.
So be ready.
But I mean, you have to mortise in the holes in the posts, so you can stick the I mean, you're going to shave the wood. I mean, and I know guys who actually use real wood. You go out, like do your neighbor's hedge. And steal some steal some sticks off your neighbor's hedge that look good, and shave them down. And no, he didn't say how long a fence he's going to make either. But I mean, it's going to be a lot of work. But if you want it to look good, you almost have to do it out of real wood. I mean, you can buy, of course, model strip wood, but the strip wood almost looks too nice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's too
realistic.
perfect. You want something that looks kind of like right straight out of the woods.
Yeah.
So.
Speaking of using real materials, our next question is from John in Bellingham, Washington, who asks, what do you think about using real dirt for roads, and or what are your favorite dirt materials to use?
Well, it's kind of interesting. And this is Gatorade. It involves Gatorade.
Gatorade?
When you're traveling.
I would not have guessed that.
Well, we buy Gatorade, and then, of course, you drink the Gatorade first, and you got this leftover bottle, this wide mouth bottle. Mm-hmm. And so, if you're traveling around the country, there's different soils, So I would always have an empty Gatorade bottle in the car, and if I saw something that looked good, I just scoop it up and throw it in the jar, and then put it in my suitcase and shove it home. And then generally you have to sift it. I mean, you're talking, but you get some stuff that looks pretty close, and then sift it. And there, depending on the locale, I mean, now I'm doing Southern California, where everything is kind of just sort of a tan. Color.
Dried.
Yeah, sort of a tan soil color. So it depends on your soil color too. I mean, there's I'm working with a guy who's doing Arizona. It's that kind of a red rock color, and then if you go with a Gatorade bottle and steal the gravel off of a baseball field, that red gravel they put on baseball diamonds.
Oh, yeah.
Just at night, just like
subtly,
go steal some of that red stuff and sift it down, and there you go. So yeah, just keep your eyes open no matter where you are. I even swept up my garage. Like in the winter here in Minnesota, you get this junk in the garage.
Yeah.
And it's just like real dirt, but it's already kind of powdery by the time the ice melts and everything, and you get this powdery stuff, and so I have a collection of all different kinds of stuff, and just play with it. Yeah, it's wonderful. I love it. Nothing looks better than the real stuff.
Than real dirt. Our next question is from Brian, also live. I recently dismantled my HO scale and now in progress to rebuild it. What would be the correct height for my baseboard? I am 5'7" in height.
His baseboard, you mean the base of his layout?
Yep.
Well, there again, a lot of people start out with 48. It's just because it's easy if you buy a 2x4 and an 8-foot 2x4 and you cut in half. 48. That's kind of been a standard for a long time, but I would start out, start out with 48. And if it doesn't seem right, take the legs off and saw them down. Yeah. Nothing is in stone in model railroading. If you build a mountain and you don't like it, smash it up. Start over. So
it can be fun to smash it up too.
Just take it. So anything, the first time doesn't have to be permanent. You stand it up. Maybe you don't even screw the legs on or bolt the legs on. Maybe you just put clamps on. You clamp them up. And you say, okay, look at it for a week or two. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to saw them down. So,
look at it.
Just try it out.
Look at it from every angle. Stand close, stand back.
If you get it too tall, you also want to have access. So if you get the layout too tall, then it might prevent access depending on how deep your layout is. Yeah. So you can buy a stool, or they have those automotive type ladders that are sort of like a diving board that hang out, and you see guys that get those where you can actually lay in it on your belly like on a diving board and work on your layout. It's just kind of a weird position to work in, but
maybe it's comfy. Who knows?
But anyway, so I would just try it out, and there again, let us know what you decide.
Yeah, if you ever have any feedback, send it in.
Yeah, we like to hear how people are doing,
how they're working. Our next question is from EJ in Florida, working in HO scale. I have electrical is the hardest part of the hobby for me. What suggestions do you have that might make it easier to learn more? Or make it easier?
Well, that's a pretty general question too, but we were talking about DCC, and DCC has really made the hobby a lot easier because in its simplest form, it's basically just two wires to the track, one to each rail, and away you go. Yeah. In the old days, if you wanted to run multiple trains, you had to have blocks and toggle switches and all this stuff, and there's all kinds of operator error involved with it and everything, and so. The basic thing is start out simple. You can make it as complicated as you want. Yeah. But start out simple. If you're going to go, you can buy a basic DCC system, very simple, like a 1 amp system for, I don't know, probably $300, say, and 2 wires. Hook it up to the track and go. And then learn as you go. You can certainly send us questions, as many as you want, and we'll help you along with it. But don't let the wiring scare you. You can go, there are guys that go computer systems and all that stuff. You can go completely crazy if you want to, but you don't have to.
That's your thing.
Yeah, you don't have to.
All right, I also want to just take a moment to remind everybody to, again, follow our social media channels to get great tips, and also learn when we're doing our next Track Talk Live, so Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also sign up for our newsletter, which is another great option to see all of our new content that's coming up, and again, when we're doing another Track Talk Live. So be sure to follow us and sign up below, and keep sending your questions in. We'll try and answer them in the time we have left, but if not, send us an email and we'll try and answer your question that way as well. Our next question is from John in Oregon, working in HO, a lot of HO. I just bought an AR1 auto reversing unit and four opto sensors. Has anyone used a setup like this to run a trolley forward and backwards? Is there a way of having the trolley pause before returning the trip? I have relays and diodes on my toolbox. Thanks for the help, and I don't want a bunch of other ideas presented.
Well, AR1, as I remember, that's a circuitron board, and it seems to me that there is, maybe it's the next kind of step up in that board, but I think there is a way you can actually reverse the polarity of the track right as part of that just single board. Normally, like with a trolley, if you're doing something like that, it doesn't have to be DCC because it's so simple. And if you use DC, all you have to do is reverse the polarity. So generally speaking, what happens is you have that AR board, which works off of a photo sensor. And when the trolley hits the photo sensor, it reverses the polarity. But and I think there's also a time delay. You might talk or get a hold of it, go online or call Circuitron. I know Steve at Circuitron very well. Call him up and just tell him what you're doing. And I think there's a particular board or maybe an add-on board that would give you the reversing relay and time delay.
Complicated wiring there. All
well,
right.
not too, really. It's not. No,
really?
It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
I mean, because these boards are pretty straightforward, and they're, Steve designed these back in the DC days, and so they're really designed for that type of operation.
Cool. All right, our next question is from Lloyd in Issaquah, Washington. I was going to say an N scale, and he was wondering what your favorite commercial products are for telephone and power lines.
Ooh, well, there is, boy, I have to remember the manufacturer now. There's a line called Easy Line, and I wish I could remember who the manufacturer is now. But anyway, you can look it up online under Easy Line, and it's the coolest stuff. It actually drapes. In the old days, people would try to use thread, but it wouldn't really hang right, and either that or you had to pull it really taut, and it was too stiff looking. And so this Easy Line, it comes in different thicknesses and different colors, and it's so cool. It will drape like a real line, and it's kind of springy. So if you're working on your layout and you accidentally hit it, it just kind of springs back. Yeah, it's got give. It's a doggone neat stuff. I don't know where it comes from, but it is so cool. And so basically you stretch it in between the insulators and put a little very small dot of super glue right at the insulator, and then just kind of let it drape and go to the next pole, and then do the same thing, very tiniest bit of super glue, and it works great. It's the best stuff ever.
Sounds good to me. All right, we have a question from Tom in Kentucky, working in HO. And this is, let me see if I can say this right here, Digitrax Zephyr controller.
Yeah.
Can you measure the output voltage? If you can, I'm only getting 0.5 volts full of throttle. I get 13.5 to it both DC volts. It's a complex
Digitrax DCC system?
Yep.
Well, because DCC is not, it's a carrier, it's a 14-volt alternating current carrier voltage with a radio signal superimposed on it.
Yep.
So you can't use a regular meter.
Okay.
It's not going to work. It's just not going to, there's too many different things going on in that signal. So generally speaking, your power supply itself would be, a little higher voltage, say 16 volt going in, and AC. Into your, and then depending on the current, like say that Zephyr, I'm not sure what current rating that is. Let's just pick a number. Say it's 5 amp. I can't remember for sure. But anyway, say it's a 5 amp. So you'd have a power supply that would handle the current for that unit. And then it goes into the Zephyr box, which is like a little brain, and it switches everything around, takes the signal and sends out the correct signals from the throttle and all that kind of stuff. And there are meters that will read the voltage. Tony's Train Exchange out of Essex Junction, Vermont, makes one out of their, boy, I say I'm so bad at names anymore. Anyway, in their electronics parts that they actually design themselves. And it's actually is a DCC meter that you can mount on your layout or use it as a remote unit. They actually sell a little bezel where you can actually mount it right on the fascia of your layout, and reads not only the voltage but the current as DCC. Handy. And that's what I would recommend getting. Most everybody I work with has one of those meters, and it's really great.
Super handy.
So you might contact them. Tony's Train Exchange.
Tony's Train Exchange. Get a meter. Should be good. We got another live question from Bill. At what distance should feeders be put in the layout that connect the bus wires, or around the layout that connect the bus wires? What distance should they be? Well,
the kind of the general rule of thumb is like 6 to 8 feet.
6 to 8?
Roughly. I mean, that can vary depending, but the other thing is if as we talked about how things go bad in the back, if you get some track that's hard to access, I would put in extra feeders, because if the rail connectors are going to go bad, they'll always go bad in the back. Never right in the front.
Or you can't get them.
Yeah, so I would say at least every 6 to 8 feet. If you have more switches and things and a kind of more complicated track work, it might be better to put more feeders in just to be safe. If it goes bad in the front, you can always add another feeder. It's real easy.
But in the back.
But generally speaking, 6 to 8 feet.
6 to 8 feet. All right, we got a question from Paul in Birmingham, UK, working in, it says, NHO and British OO scales.
All right.
A variety of scales. Can you suggest a relatively inexpensive way of adding locomotive and rolling stock sound on a DC layout? DCC is not an option for me as I have too many locos varying in vintages to economic proposition to change over. And he lives in the UK, he wants to just remind.
Well, there were some simplistic systems that worked with DC, and basically they were a kind of a sound module you can put in the locomotive, and as you increased the speed of the locomotive, of course, that would increase the voltage in the track.
Yeah.
And then so it's like a volume control. You know, as you increase the voltage, it got louder. You know, so but the trouble is, there's so little of that stuff available anymore because everybody's going DCC. So there might be some old units around the predecessor to Soundtracks, who makes decoders out in Colorado now. They had, it was a Throttle Up, I think was the brand. They actually made soundboards
specifically,
but I'm sure they don't make them anymore. But you might look up that name, Throttle Up. I mean, there are other people who would put like speakers around their layout and like hide speakers in buildings or something, so it kind of seemed like it was coming from the track, that kind of thing. And then, oh man, they would use like detectors so that when your train is in a particular area, that particular speaker would be on and that kind of thing. But I think that's so complicated. But I know the problem of switching your locomotives over to DCC, because you have to put decoders in every locomotive, and if you want sound, they're around $100 a piece to put a sound decoder in. So. Well, good luck, and boy, let us know what you come up with.
What you come up with there, yeah. We have another person, Everett, in Portage, MI, who is also working in multiple scales, G, S, O, and HO.
Wow.
Who is asking, how do I create a layout that I can incorporate multiple scales in, and how do you suggest to group them? Can you do this, put multiple scales in a layout?
Well, people, have done that where it gets into the theatrics.
Yeah.
Where you do the bigger scale in the foreground and then use forced perspective. As you go back, and then the smaller stuff is in the back, so it actually it actually
you're standing,
works. Yeah, I mean that's what they call forced perspective, and people have done some really cool stuff with that. I mean, you can do that. I mean, in a simplistic thing like in scenery, people like say you want to have an HO layout and you want to do a Forest Ranger tower way in the back. We can have this little itsy bitsy little Forest Ranger tower in the top of the mountain. That's not HO scale, but it forces that perspective, and so. Yeah, basically, I would say use the bigger scale in the foreground, and then work toward the back with your scale. That would be the most natural way to do it.
Yeah, line them up in order, sort of there. Cool. All right, our next question is from Joseph in Virginia, working in HO scale. I own 4 Bowser Steam locos and would like to know what motor I could use instead of the DC-70.
Well, Northwest Shortline. Boy, they make an amazing amount of stuff. I don't know how they even keep track of it. They make so much stuff. But Northwest Shortline makes CAN motors. Just all different kinds of sizes and diameters and lengths, and I mean they make a million. I don't know where they come. Anyways, all these different motors, and and they come in millimeter sizes. So you measure the inside of your Bowser boiler, and see what diameter motor would fit inside of there. And that's what I'd recommend. And generally speaking, because those motors are round, they don't mount the way an old DC-70 would. You just basically mount them in silicone. You can just lay your motor in a bed of silicone, and then it's sound isolated and everything, and it's just perfect. And then Northwest Shortline makes universal joints and flywheels and all that work along with your motor. So I would say go online, check out Northwest Shortline. Measure the inside of your locomotive, see what'll fit, and then look at all the parts they have. They're a fantastic operation. They've done so much for the hobby of model railroading.
That's cool. All right, our last question that we have time for is another live one submitted by Lou. Lou says, I have an O-scale layout that I'm using an MTH-TIU, I'm not sure what that means, and handheld DCS remote controller. There are 3 separate transformers running 3 loops that connect to each other via switch tracks. All wiring works great usually, but now and then I get shorts when I'm passing from loop to loop. This seems to happen only when I have too many engines on the tracks. Any thoughts on my issue would be appreciated.
Well, boy, I don't know. It's hard. I'm not quite sure what that would be without seeing the setup. It's possible that it could be if you're running a lot of trains at the same time, you're overloading the system. I mean, it just because it's O scale, it takes more current than the smaller scales, and it could be that you're just overloading the system. You get on, you're crossing over to the on another line which has another power supply, and then all of a sudden this power supply is getting all this current draw and it can't handle it. So that, I'm guessing that would probably be the most likely reason.
The most likely.
Yeah, but there again, let us know if you figure out something. I'd like to know what you find out.
Investigating. All right, I'd just like to remind you one more time to follow us on all of our social media channels and sign up for our newsletter below this video in the little banner so that you can be notified of our next Track Talk Live, get all of our great tips and tricks. And do you have any closing comments for us, Doug?
Well, thank you for being a great new moderator.
Thanks for having me.
And as always, run trains!
Bye, see you next time.